Welcome back to Kelma B'Kelma. This is episode number 6. Thank you to everyone for all of the attention that you've been giving us so far with the series. Today we're in Project Green's offices here for an interview with the CEO of Project Green, Steve Ellul. Steve is a Chartered Financial Analyst and the CEO of Project Green, which is a government agency that is committed towards the investment of greening and environmental projects within our community. Steve has served as a policy advisor for the Ministry of Environment, Energy and Enterprise in the past, and is a visiting lecturer at the University of Malta in Principles of Finance. Yesterday, Malta had the pleasure of meeting Steve at EcoXperience a couple of months ago, an event which Project Green collaborate on bringing, and we're very privileged to have him on Kelma B'Kelma. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure to be here.
So let's get going with regards to your environmental vision and the way kind of Project Green was scoped around in kind of embellishing Malta and replenishing green spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So there are so many famous examples worldwide where the integration of flora and greenery within urban and metropolitan areas have resulted in average cooler temperatures, a lower air quality index, a promotion of the local ecology and the increase in people's mental well-being. La Rambla in Barcelona and all the many kind of green parks in Copenhagen and Berlin are famous examples on our continent. So when and how did your environmental vision stem? And what have you learned in your journey investing into green spaces?
Look, I think something which is very important to appreciate is that we are a very tiny island. We live on a very tiny island.
Sure.
Malta is the smallest country, or one of the smallest countries within Europe, with a very limited territory and with a very high density population. Those are the peculiarities of this nation, but that doesn't mean that anyone living on this island doesn't have the same requirements, the same ambitions for green open spaces compared to someone else living anywhere on the continent. So I think this idea of ensuring that we achieve a better balance in this country drove the idea of Project Green, which is essentially an agency which will drive, and is effectively driving at this moment in time, a number of projects across the island of different scope and different nature, to ensure that we achieve this kind of better balance. And with better balance, I mean better beautification as well of the island, and also green open spaces. And there is this feeling amongst the population that we need more and proper open spaces, not just for relaxation, which is obviously very important, but also to ensure that we have adequate spaces where people can live and not just live, I mean in the sense of extending their work time, places where one could go and relax, places where one could go and study, for example, and extended his or her study time. We want open spaces where we can actually achieve our ambitions, just like you would do in any other city in Europe. And this is what Project Green is all about. And we have identified quite a number of projects. We have quite a pipeline at this moment in time. Some of the projects have been announced already. Some others we're literally working on at this moment in time to ensure that wherever you are in this country, you would have a quality open space within 10 minutes walk. That's something that is ultimately what we want to achieve, and that's what we're working on at the moment in time.
Perfect. So relating to green urbanization, everybody seems to have an opinion about the construction industry in Malta and what the present and future holds. Naturally, there are sort of environmental effects caused by drastic development, but also development projects are a foundation for economic growth and are necessary to serve a sort of growing population and the demand that it requires, right? You've indicated in the past that sustainable and certified green buildings could be the just solution. So could you elaborate where that momentum for reform in the construction industry could come from?
I have to be clear on this. I think the time has come in this country to rethink the way we tackle the construction industry and the way the construction industry is placed in our economy. Again, we're a tiny island, so the territory is what it is, so we really need to make sure that we get the best kind of construction, and we do more with less in terms of space. So the idea is to make sure that open spaces, for me, for example, it's very clear that O to Z is O to Z. So we really need to make sure that the construction industry itself, I think, needs to adapt really to what we really need to achieve in this country.
For sure.
Where we want to be in this country in 30 years' time, for example. Rather than looking backwards 30 years and trying to copy what we did in the last 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's focus on the bigger picture. We as a country need to move forward towards a greener economic model, a more sustainable economic model. And you cannot achieve that without modifying those sectors and helping those sectors to make the leap towards a better level. And in my opinion, the construction industry is very critical in this. It's key, and it's transition, it's key. And one way how to ensure this kind of transition in the construction industry is to push forward the green construction. Green construction is, nowadays we have the technology to actually drive that kind of industry. Green construction is purely certified buildings which would use much less energy, which would consume much less energy. Why? Because they would have bigger windows, for example, that would allow more light to come in, for example. That would use renewable energy rather than fossil fuels connected to the grid, perhaps. So, and these buildings would use, for example, and reuse the water resource to cool buildings. And we have quite a summer here in Malta, so cooling is very important, and therefore the more you reduce energy in terms of cooling, the better and more sustainable that building would be. And these buildings, this construction industry is the construction industry of the future. You look all around Europe and you're seeing these green buildings coming on stream and actually be developed. Look at what happened in Milan, for example, with the Bosco Verticale, 2 huge towers which house thousands of trees. Actually, they house more trees than compared to residents. Mm-hmm. So even that construction, which to us is awful to look at, these huge buildings, even those buildings can actually be transited towards a greener construction. Let alone, in my opinion, more modest buildings, particularly industrial buildings, which can be converted not just because of the environment. I think that is priority number 1, undeniably, but also because of a commercial element, because there's a commercial element to that as well. Because if you reduce the operating cost of running a building, the energy consumption that you need to run a building, then you reduce basically 40 to 50% of your running cost in a building. So this is the balance I try to explain, the idea that we can achieve environmental targets, we can achieve better well-being for the people without denting the corporate need, for money making. So I think this kind of balance needs to be achieved, and we need to work harder all across industries, particularly in the construction industry. Although I don't come from the construction industry myself, but I can see that we have the potential to make this transition. The worst thing that we could do in this country would be to stay put and keep on doing what we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years. That's the worst thing we can do at this moment in time, because our economy is at a juncture where we need to choose whether to go for a higher level economy that would, yes, achieve growth. It's very important we have economic growth, but we really need also to achieve proper improvement in the well-being and standards of our people. And how do you do that? By investing in the environment and also investing on the social element and the social development of our people. And this is, I think, something which is very important. And I feel that the construction industry has a very big role to play. If we manage to change the construction industry, imagine what we can do with other industries which are less abrasive on the environment compared to the construction industry.
So you touched upon the critical kind of characteristics about where Malta is at the moment in terms of the context of having an economic growth model and investing into innovation and the quality of life being a sort of priority for where we want to go as a country, especially in the context of a post-pandemic society where economic activity is so critical. Where does degrowth potentially fit into that Maltese context, if it's possible to think about investing in a sustainable way, or thinking about things in a more of a holistic way, maybe in a more systems thinking way?
Yeah, I think it's a mindset change that we need to push. The idea of ensuring that all our sectors, or all our companies, not just the public sector, but even the private sector itself, I think they need to start thinking beyond profits.
Okay.
So up till now, the vast majority of our corporate entities, I wouldn't say all of them, but the vast majority of our corporate entities, particularly I must say the construction industry, has been driven by numbers, by profits at the end of the year, which is okay, it's understandable, and the private enterprise is what it is. But we could do better progress as a society at large by, yes, targeting corporate profits, but also achieving a balance, and the right balance on the environmental side. And we cannot think about progress if we do not think on these two important aspects in the same way. So we cannot speak about profits without speaking about and delivering on the environmental ambitions of our people.
Okay.
Because that's not well-being. That might bring economic growth and strong economic growth, but ultimately our people's ambitions today are very different from what they were 10, 15 years ago. There's not just Malta, it's all across Europe. 15 years ago, we were in the midst of financial crisis. Unemployment was at its highest all across Europe, even here in Malta. So people back then used to think about whether they would be able to find a job, whether they would be able to retain that job, and perhaps ways how to improve their income. Now, fast forward 15 years, we went through a couple of crises, a pandemic and the war.
Yeah.
We're still going through that. And we made a lot of effort, even in this country, to get out of those issues economically. But now our people want a better quality of life. And it is extremely important to modify and elevate our economic model to achieve the ambitions of today, rather than what we used to ambit for 15 years ago. And the only way you can do it is by starting sector by sector, industry by industry. You start changing them and instigate change in those sectors. And with change, I think we really need to send the right signal and the right message. With change, we don't mean that we should shut down one sector or another. What we need to do is in every single sector, we need to have these discussions at boardroom level. All DC levels, the people who actually take decisions need to ensure that they are not just there to drive profits, but they are there to drive profits, yes, but also the well-being of the people. And you can achieve that. Mm-hmm. And the classic example with the construction industry, I think, is very clear. If you reduce your operating cost by 50%, that's profits at the end of the year, but a better quality of life for the surrounding community because of lower pollution emitters, because of lower use of energy and fossil fuels, so on and so forth. But you can see this across industries. I've worked for the ESG and in the ESG remit for some years now, and we've seen so many companies, even here in Malta, returning the best return for shareholders, for their investors, not when they were doing the same good old things, but effectively when they were investing in the environment. And we've seen this in the last 3 years. We've seen those companies that actually outperformed the Maltese stock exchange market, where those companies had effectively started investing in the environment. Then this goes beyond quality of life, in my opinion. It also hits directly the bottom line of the profitability of these companies. So there is an economic sense to invest in the environment. There's an economic sense to invest in the quality of life of people. And I think this message needs to come across, because too often I feel that many still believe that if you invest in the environment, then you have to take a cut on your profits. It's not the case. It's the other way around. And with the increased sensitivity of the younger generation, we're seeing a lot of pressures for companies to actually produce and put on the shelf sustainable products and sustainable services. This kind of bottom-up demand drive will make sure that all our companies actually drive and put forward sustainable rather than conventional products and services across industries. And I think that's something which is extremely important.
So I think communication is obviously key in this aspect as well. So if you imagine 20 years ago, the kind of renowned economic activity or industry in Malta might have been hospitality or tourism, but now Malta operates in a stage where there may be 5 or 6 possibly critical economic activities that are possible for the country. And when we are in a stage at the moment where the context is rapidly evolving and changing, and it's changing so quickly, not just within the context of Malta, but obviously uncontrollable circumstances that may have affected us recently, people may be forgiven for thinking that we're in a similar state as we were in 2008, where rapid economic growth may mirror what happened in the face of a crisis back then. But it's a different type of economic growth right now, isn't it?
It's totally different.
So the stability of the market kind of relies on the communication being there. So do you think that that aspect is also important, investing into the way we market things, the way we communicate things, especially in the sense that there can be room for innovation, sustainability and degrowth on the same level, but then what's gluing it all together would be, I suppose, the communication, right?
Yes, I think we need to give more visibility to those companies, and we have many of them here in Malta,
Exactly,
that are actually embarking on this model. And I've seen this across industries. You mentioned the tourism industry, for example. I see a lot of companies here in Malta operating and pushing forward the idea of having a better quality tourism, which I think is extremely important for the sustainability of the tourism economic model, but also of the broader Maltese economic model. A case in point, in my opinion, is the film industry, for example. The film industry here in Malta can be a very good example, and I've seen quite an improvement in the film industry in recent years, but that industry can be, or that sub-industry within the context of tourism can be a big driver of sustainability. Why? Because it brings to Malta operators who spend a lot of money for every day in which they stay here, and it's an industry which can be spread across shoulder months, so you don't have the same infrastructure impact on our infrastructure, but also on the environment. Sports tourism, for example, has another key role in driving sustainable tourism sector. So see, this is another pillar of our economy, tourism. We have always thought about the success of tourism in terms of people coming to Malta. And it's nice to know that we're achieving good numbers, millions of people coming to Malta for tourism, but that doesn't mean that the formula that worked in the last 30 years will work in the next 30 years.
Absolutely.
In the last 10 years, we've seen these numbers doubling. Are we really, do we really want today's numbers, which I believe we're gonna have a record number of tourists coming to Malta, which is okay. But do we really expect that to double in the next 10 years? Do we want that? Because I believe that what we really want is to double not the quantity of tourists, but the quality of tourists, the spend per every single bed night that they have here in Malta. And this is what other countries in the Mediterranean are doing, across Europe, but also on the eastern side of the Mediterranean. I've seen this happening in Tel Aviv, for example. So if they can do it, then I'm very much sure that this country can drive the transition. But I've seen this in other industries. I come from the financial industry myself. I see a lot of good things happening in the financial industry, which is a very boring industry and a very grey industry in terms of environmental, in the context of the environment. But even there, I'm seeing good signals. Companies and banks offering a very, very, very cheap rates on their loans for green mortgages and green loans.
Yes.
So this is, these are different sectors which will not be shut down. We will still have a big tourism industry in Malta, but we need it to be a sustainable one. We will still have a huge financial industry here in Malta in the next 10 years, but we want it to drive the green transition of our economy. And in the same way we're doing with other industries, absolutely. This is exactly what's happening in all other countries in Europe. So we cannot be behind this change, behind this transition. I would say we're such a small country, and we're so nimble that we can drive, and if we send the right signals, as you mentioned, the communication, if we send the right signals, if we give the right kind of visibility to these companies that are actually bringing this transition on their own steam, then Malta can be a very good example in terms of economic transition compared to other countries. because we're
what
small.
What you're saying is, given our size, the inertia would be...
Yes, it's because we're nimble, we can be fast in taking decisions and implementing them. And if we do this kind of transition, then others can actually follow us. And I'm very much ambitious on this. I think we can send the right signal. I'm very positive on the kind of reception that many business leaders, even here in Malta, are having in terms of this transition. And if they achieve this, if we as a team, I would say, the public sector, the private sector, drive this transition, then we can send a good signal even at European level.
Fantastic. So we have a couple more questions just to close up the interview.
So I'll be rapid in my answers.
Fantastic. Energy has always been a hot topic in Malta, and we are obviously a country that is investing towards innovation and towards that security, and naturally we want to have a clean and green energy model. So are there any strategies that could be in place in order to reduce our reliance on important energy sources and obviously boost our energy security?
I think something very, very interesting that is happening at this moment in time, and I see Minister Miriam Dalli pushing this a lot, is the investment in our maritime resources. Energy can have a big role there. I mean, our territory is what it is. We cannot have onshore wind farms, but yes, we can have offshore floating wind farms that can supply a big amount of megawatts into our grid. And that is the way we can shift towards greener energy solutions. That is, in my opinion, something which is critical. I love the fact that there is a lot of investment going on this aspect, and there is a lot of international interest of a very high level in Malta's maritime energy infrastructure. I also believe that Malta is strategically very well placed to make sure that we get the right approach towards greener energy solutions, particularly hydrogen solutions, between North Africa and Europe. There have been some significant talks on this side. I think this is something which can be a potential game changer, not just for Malta's energy sector, but also critical for the reliance of safer and greener energy sources at European level.
So we'll intend to end the interview with a message maybe for young people and the role that young people could play. You've stated in the past that young people that enter the labour market see companies with a strong commitment to ESG values. Project Green have also centred their vision on this concept, investing into green spaces with youth at the heart of the idea, for example, just outside MCAST, Mosta. What could be your message for younger generations as we begin to have a greater influence and make a more meaningful impact on the industry?
Very clear. There's a beautiful country. We can work together to make it even more beautiful. And the way you do this is by, we can all speak about all the negative things that we can come across in these small islands. But I see a lot of very good activism, a lot of young people wanting to bring real change. So my message to these people, to these young colleagues, if I can describe them that way, is to find people who can help them achieve the ambitions they have, particularly on the environmental side. Malta has its own challenges, but together we can really change them into opportunities. And I think the best way to do that is to find like-minded individuals who can drive this change, who are actually more interested in delivering stuff rather than talking about the negative side of things, who are more interested in delivering positive change rather than staying put and staying away from that kind of transition. That's important. I think we have a lot of very good activists like yourselves. Let's keep pushing.
Thank you so much for your time today.
My honest pleasure to have you.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for watching.